Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Here we are again with episode 92 of the Near Memo, slowly making our way to episode 100. I'm here again, as always, with Mike and David, and we're going to be talking about technology, local, search, social, and commerce. And we're going to start off today. We're going to talk about ChatGPT and its application to digital marketing and local. We're going to be talking about, Mike has done a bunch of work on kind of examining the Google review zapping algorithm. And then we're going to be talking about the Beam, which is the fallen victim to Google's moderation, unfortunately. So leading off with ChatGPT, obviously this has been a huge thing this week. OpenAI introduced this in beta. I don't know whether it was Monday or late last week, whenever it came out, and already well over 1 million people are using it, and people are posting all kinds of things that they've done with it. They're writing poetry and sonnets, and they're generating code and writing marketing emails. And it really is an amazing thing. In some ways, more amazing than the image generators, because it seems more polished to me than those in some cases. And I wrote a piece earlier this week for the newsletter about its application to local. And even though currently it doesn't make any recommendations, it won't recommend service businesses, it won't do anything sort of future looking, it won't talk about, you do best hotel or best plumber, whatever, it won't make those, it won't give you any content there because it says it doesn't recommend individual businesses. But one could easily see it being applied as part of some nouveau search engine to local. You train it on a domain or you train it on a data set, and then it could mine that and give you coherent responses. So what do you guys think about, we can also talk about local SEO, because I think there's obviously copy that can be generated, landing page copy and marketing copy that can be generated. But what do you think about its application in the local context?
Yeah, Greg, I would say, just to pick up on the point that you sort of closed with there, there have been a number of AI tools, Jasper and others that have commercialized products that have been specifically geared at writing content from prompts. And I think your point that this is so much more sophisticated than the image creation software that we've seen so far. I also think it's more sophisticated than the copy generating software that we've seen so far. It seems like a quantum leap ahead in terms of its ability to understand, adjectives of the style that you're looking for.
Right, Shakespearean sonnets.
Exactly, right. And so I do think that it really does hold significant applications if you are an SEO to say, hey, we need a piece of content that talks about these, 3 topics. Here's the outline, and here's the style that we want it written in, and boom, and here's the approximate number of words. And I feel like it will be really powerful to generate that content. Again, I don't know that you could just publish that immediately to a WordPress blog, but as a means of giving your content team a 90% running start on new content, I think it really holds a lot of potential. So
in that regard, it sort of shifts the relationship between the writer and the editor to emphasizing the editor as a more important role. You have to, 1, fact check all of this because it could be inaccurate. And 2, you have to massage it in a way that makes it both more professional and more appropriate for the context. But it means that a really good editor could possibly produce more content. It also could be used by or people who are interested in writing more original content to understand sort of what the common thought or thread is about a given idea. So you then could start your writing where that left off. For example, I asked it, how do you get rid of rats in New York? And it gave me a list of 5 points. And the reality is there's probably 5 other points that one could think about that would go beyond those. But clearly this is sort of the common wisdom of how you get rid of rats in New York. And so I think it could provide a really solid basis for somebody who's looking to create original content that doesn't cover the same ground or covers that same ground quickly and then moves on to new content.
Well, you raise an interesting point by implication, which is so many people will be relying on this. I don't know what the business model will be. I'm sure it'll be some sort of subscription, but a lot cheaper than hiring a human to do, a sort of a junior human to do original drafts on things. But lots of people will be relying on this, and you'll get a lot of similar prompts and similar content. Maybe not verbatim exactly the same thing, but I would imagine that there will be similarities in a lot of the content generated, just as there's a lot of similarity in the marketing copy and reports and so on and so forth that are generated today. So people will have to be, putting aside Google's moderation of any of this content or demotion of any of this content under the helpful content update. I think you'll have to be sort of conscious that the world around you is doing the same thing. And how are you going to make it interesting, different, unique, or unique enough from other content?
Shakespeare has an SEO. There's the style.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to try and riff on that spontaneously, but it's too early and I'm not smart enough. Do some sort of iambic pentameter SEO thing.
I told it to write me iambic pentameter about a bartender in Baltimore. It did only a fair job, but I sent it along to my son.
But it's a machine. It's a machine. It's a machine, though, which is amazing.
So I also attempted to have it write poetry, and it did a couple of very powerful limericks. So I think it just depends on the style that you ask for.
The problem with limericks, though, it doesn't go to the more risque side. Those are banned. So
that's because
by tradition, a limerick is supposed to be a little dirty.
Well, that's where the human editorial input comes in.
I tried it too, David.
Before we move on to the beam, just what do you think about this from a kind of a user search experience, local alternative to Google? What do you think the potential is?
Sure. I mean, I think it is potentially very powerful it does a better job with voice search in terms of spitting back an answer than most of the apps that I've seen, including Siri, including Google Voice.
So you're saying that it could be this text could be converted to a voice interface and used as an answer to more complicated queries, answering some of the problems that we talked about last week with the Echo.
Yeah. So I think it's potentially a real opportunity for voice to have a sort of resurgence. Frankly, I mean, maybe I'm sort of a user population of one, but I still prefer the sort of classic. It's much faster for me to scan a classic Google or Bing or whatever style search result than it is to try to sort of parse the text that these things are spitting out. I don't really enjoy the sort of chat interface to nearly the same level that other people do, I think. So I don't know that I would be a user of this as a search paradigm with respect to a visual result, but anything's possible. So
yeah, but you're old compared to a lot of people now. So
right. Well, but the youngins are on TikTok now, Greg. So
well, that's true. That's true. But the chat interface, I think, there was that search engine Andy that we talked about, ANDI, that we talked about a while ago, which has this kind of hybrid experience where it's got a chat UI and then it kind of spits out a quasi SERP on the back end with individual websites. And I think there are some people who really like the chat experience and chat interface. And I think this is not going to come in and take over from Google, but there may be some search applications, or maybe it's in a vertical where this could be very useful, and where people, my thesis now is that people don't. This goes to the Freakonomics podcast that we're not going to get into today about is Google getting worse, what have you. When Google took over from Yahoo, it was because there was now too much information for the old kind of Yahoo style curation to deal with. And Google's, algorithm was much better at organizing information. Now people don't need that. They want less information, right? So this is really well suited for a kind of finite data set that can give you clear answers to clear questions. Mike, you were going to say
relative to Andy. Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in. Relative to Andy, it has two, I think, strong differentiators, which are, number one, the interface is much better. It's much simpler. It's, input, output. That's it. There's no sort of visual, sort of side-by-side view clutter. And the second thing is way faster. Andy took 3 seconds to load the page. It was unacceptable to me. And this OpenAI chat is like half a second. So I do think from a speed and sort of context of delivery standpoint, it's much better than the current experiment that Andy is trying.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is if you ask it for a list of things, it'll give you a more sort of highlighted view of it. The other is one really wonders where it gets its content. For example, I asked it who founded Gather Up, and it said Aaron Weike and Mike Blumenthal. So
Poor Don.
Poor Don, exactly. I sent the results off to Don, and I told him he's going to be forgotten in AI history very quickly.
Yeah. Is he suing to be included in that list?
Well, so clearly Aaron and I write a lot more, and we're a lot more present, and we present a lot more, and we've been speaking a lot more. So clearly there's some element of frequency involved in that. The question is, will people start gaming OpenAI sources to get their content into the answers? And what does that look like? Right?
Well, it's the entire internet, I suspect, is the source.
Well, it isn't, because if it was the entire internet, Don would have at least been mentioned.
Well,
right?
maybe. Well, I mean, we don't know. We don't know what it's a large language model, which is all of these things are trained on the internet, whatever the data set is. I mean, the data set, you're right. It's not the entire internet. It's some subset of content.
Right.
That they've
It would
identified.
make more sense, for example, to look at answers at the Google My Business Forum or the Google Help documents about how to solve specific problems, and to look at the whole internet for that.
Right. This is why it's particularly suited to verticals where there's a finite data set, and if you have some credible inputs, you could get a good result.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.